It all began on a crisp autumn evening, just like any other. I remember the exact moment when that unsettling feeling first crept over me. I was curled up on my living room couch, engrossed in a novel, when a sudden chill ran down my spine. My eyes darted to the window, half expecting to see a face peering in, but there was nothing there, just the inky blackness of night. I tried to shake it off, but over the next few days that sensation of being watched intensified. At first, it was subtle, a prickling at the back of my neck while I was cooking dinner, or a fleeting shadow in my peripheral vision as I walked to my car. I chalked it up to stress or an overactive imagination. But then, things started to get weird. One morning, I found my bedroom window slightly ajar, even though I was certain I'd locked it the night before. A few days later, I noticed that some of my clothes in the laundry basket had been rearranged. Small things, easy to dismiss, but they added up. I started double-checking locks, drawing curtains, and sleeping with a baseball bat beside my bed. My friends told me I was being paranoid, but they hadn't felt those eyes boring into them, hadn't experienced that constant nagging dread. I tried to go about my life normally, but it was impossible. Every crowded street became a sea of potential threats, every dark corner a hiding place for unseen eyes. I felt like I was losing my mind, jumping at every sound and shadow. Little did I know, this was only the beginning of my nightmare, a nightmare that would push me to the very edge of sanity. The first note appeared on a Tuesday. I found it tucked under my windshield wiper, a small white envelope with my name scrawled across it in spidery handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it, revealing a single sentence: "I see you when you sleep." I reported it to the police, but they dismissed it as a prank. I wasn't convinced. Over the next week, more notes followed. Some were left on my doorstep. Others mysteriously appeared inside my locked house. Each message grew more personal, more threatening. "Red looks good on you. Wear it more often. You shouldn't eat so late at night. It's bad for your health. I love watching you brush your hair. So mesmerizing." The stalker knew my routines, my habits, even my thoughts. I changed my locks, installed security cameras, but nothing helped. The notes kept coming, each one a stark reminder that I was never truly alone. Then came the gifts. A wilted rose on my pillow, a strip of my own hair tied with a ribbon on my kitchen counter, a Polaroid of me sleeping, taken from inside my bedroom. I was trapped in a waking nightmare. Sleep became impossible, and paranoia consumed my every waking moment. I scrutinized every face I passed on the street, wondering if they were the one watching me, tormenting me. The police remained unhelpful, citing lack of evidence of an actual threat. As the days wore on, I realized a chilling truth. In this twisted game of cat and mouse, I was on my own. And my unseen tormentor was always one step ahead. Desperate for answers, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I began keeping meticulous records of every incident, every note, every unexplained occurrence. I set up my own surveillance system, hidden cameras in every room of my house and on my property. For weeks, I pored over hours of footage, searching for any sign of my stalker. But they were clever, always managing to stay just out of frame or hidden in shadows. It was maddening, knowing they were so close yet remaining invisible. I started laying traps, tripwires connected to alarms, motion-activated lights, even glitter bombs in places where notes had been left before. But my tormentor was always one step ahead, as if they could read my mind. One night, I caught a break. A shadowy figure appeared on my backyard camera, moving with eerie precision to avoid my traps. Heart pounding, I grabbed my bat and rushed outside, but by the time I reached the spot, they were gone. All that remained was a note: "Nice try, my turn now." The game had shifted. I was no longer just prey, I had become an active participant in this twisted hunt. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. Every moment was spent watching, waiting, trying to outsmart my unseen adversary. I began to see patterns in their behavior, subtle clues in their messages. They weren't just watching me, they were studying me, learning my every move, and with each passing day, their actions grew bolder, their presence more palpable. I knew it was only a matter of time before this deadly game would reach its climax. The question was, would I be ready when it did? It happened on a stormy night, because of course it did. The power in my neighborhood had gone out, plunging everything into darkness. I was huddled in my living room, clutching my bat, every nerve on edge. A creak from upstairs sent my heart racing. This was it. They were inside. I crept up the stairs, each step an eternity. Lightning illuminated the hallway in brief, terrifying flashes. I reached my bedroom door, took a deep breath, and burst in, swinging wildly. But the room was empty. Confused, I turned around, and there they stood, blocking the doorway. A figure cloaked in shadow, their face hidden beneath a hood. "Who are you?" I screamed, raising my bat. "What do you want from me?" They chuckled, a sound that sent ice through my veins. "Oh, your name. I want what I've always wanted. You." The voice was familiar, disturbingly. As lightning flashed again, I caught a glimpse of their face. My blood ran cold. It couldn't be. But before I could process what I'd seen, they lunged at me. We grappled in the darkness, crashing into furniture, each fighting for survival. I felt their hands around my throat, squeezing tighter and tighter. With my last ounce of strength, I reached for the bedside lamp and swung it hard. There was a sickening crack, and the grip on my throat loosened. The figure crumpled to the floor. Gasping for air, I fumbled for my phone, dialing 911 with shaking fingers. As sirens wailed in the distance, I stared at the motionless form on my bedroom floor, my mind reeling from the revelation of my stalker's identity. The days following the confrontation passed in a blur of police interviews and sleepless nights. The identity of my stalker sent shockwaves through the community. It was someone I knew, someone I had trusted. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound. As the full extent of their obsession came to light, I struggled to come to terms with what had happened. Their apartment was a shrine to me. Walls covered with photos, notebooks filled with detailed accounts of my daily life. They had been watching me for years, long before I ever felt those first uneasy stirrings of being watched. The trial was a media circus. I had to relive every terrifying moment, every violation of my privacy and sense of security. But in the end, justice was served. My stalker was sentenced to years behind bars, and I was left to pick up the pieces of my shattered life. Recovery was a long, arduous process. Therapy helped, but the scars ran deep. I jumped at shadows, flinched at unexpected sounds. Trust became a foreign concept. But slowly, painstakingly, I began to reclaim my life. I moved to a new city, started fresh. But the experience had changed me fundamentally. I became an advocate for stalking victims, sharing my story to help others and push for stronger laws. Some nights I still wake up in a cold sweat, convinced I'm being watched. In those moments, I have to remind myself that it's over, that I'm safe. But a part of me wonders if I'll ever truly feel secure again. After all, you never know who might be watching from the shadows. It all started on a quiet Tuesday night. I just moved into my new apartment, a cozy little place on the outskirts of town. The clock on my nightstand blinked 2 a.m. when my phone suddenly rang. Groggy and confused, I fumbled for it, but by the time I answered, the line was dead. I shrugged it off and went back to sleep. The next night, it happened again. Same time, same single ring. This time, I was quicker to answer, but still, nothing but silence greeted me. I figured it must be a glitch in the system or maybe some automated call. But as the nights wore on, a pattern emerged. Every single night, without fail, my phone would ring once at exactly 2 a.m. After a week, I started to get annoyed. I tried blocking the number, but it always came through. I even changed my number, but somehow the calls persisted. That's when things took a turn for the unsettling. One night, as I answered the phone, I heard something. It wasn't silence anymore, but a faint whisper. I couldn't make out the words, but the sound sent chills down my spine. I told myself I was imagining things, that the late-night calls were just getting to me. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The whispers became a nightly occurrence, growing slightly louder each time. And then one night, I finally understood what the voice was saying. It whispered my name. From that night on, the calls became increasingly disturbing. The whispers grew more coherent, and the voice began to reveal things about me. At first, it was simple stuff, my favorite color, the name of my childhood pet. But soon, it escalated to information that no stranger should know. One night, the voice whispered, "You look tired today. Those dark circles under your eyes, you should really get more sleep." I froze, my blood turning to ice. How could the caller know what I looked like right now? I rushed to the window, frantically scanning the dark street below, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. The next night, it got even more personal. "That red shirt you wore to work today really brings out your eyes," the voice whispered. I hadn't told anyone about my outfit choice. In fact, I barely spoke to anyone at my new job. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. I was being watched. Panic set in. I started changing my routines, taking different routes to work, even staying with friends some nights. But no matter where I went, the calls followed. The voice always knew where I was, what I was doing, who I was with. It was like having a shadow that I couldn't shake off. I tried explaining the situation to my friends, but they thought I was overreacting. "It's probably just a stalker," they said, as if that was supposed to make me feel better. But I knew it was something more, something darker. The voice knew things that even a stalker couldn't possibly know. It knew my thoughts, my fears, my deepest secrets, and with each passing night, I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. As the weeks dragged on, the calls became more frequent. It wasn't just at 2 a.m. anymore. My phone would ring at random times throughout the day, always with that same whispering voice. I couldn't concentrate at work, couldn't sleep at night. Every shadow seemed to hide a watching figure, every reflective surface potentially concealing a spy. I started seeing a therapist, hoping to find some rational explanation for what was happening. But even in the safety of the therapist's office, my phone would ring. The voice would whisper, "I see you're getting help. That's good. You're gonna need it." My therapist was stunned, unable to explain how the caller knew what we were discussing in real time. One day I decided I'd had enough. I smashed my phone, threw it in the trash, and vowed to live without one. For a blissful 24 hours, I felt free. But then, as I was making dinner in my kitchen, I heard it, the familiar ring of my destroyed phone coming from the trash can. With trembling hands, I dug through the garbage and found my phone, completely intact, as if I had never smashed it. That's when I realized this was no ordinary stalker. This was something beyond my understanding, something potentially supernatural. The voice wasn't just coming from my phone anymore. I started hearing it in my head, in the rustle of leaves outside my window, in the static of my TV. It was everywhere, all the time, watching, waiting, and I had no idea what it wanted from me. As my paranoia reached its peak, I decided to take drastic measures. I quit my job, packed a bag, and left town without telling anyone. I drove for hours, finally checking into a small motel in the middle of nowhere. For the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, I had finally escaped. I collapsed onto the lumpy motel bed, exhausted but relieved. As my eyes started to close, the ancient telephone on the bedside table began to ring. My heart sank as I heard the familiar whisper, "Did you really think you could run from me?" In that moment, something in me snapped. I was done being the victim. I picked up the phone and shouted, "What do you want from me? Why are you doing this?" The line went silent for a moment, and then the voice replied, clearer than ever before, "I want you to wake up." Confused and angry, I demanded an explanation. The voice continued, "You're trapped, and I'm trying to help you escape. None of this is real. You need to wake up." I laughed bitterly, thinking this was just another mind game. But as I did, I noticed something strange. The walls of the motel room seemed to shimmer, like a mirage in the desert. I blinked hard, trying to clear my vision, but the effect only intensified. The room began to dissolve around me, reality peeling away like old wallpaper. I could hear the voice more clearly now, no longer coming from the phone, but from everywhere at once. "Wake up," it urged. "Please, wake up." Panic gripped me as I watched my surroundings melt away. I closed my eyes tightly, hoping that when I opened them, everything would be back to normal. But when I did, I found myself in a completely different place. I was lying in a hospital bed, hooked up to various machines. The steady beep of a heart monitor filled the air. As my vision cleared, I saw a figure sitting beside me holding my hand. It was my mother, her face lined with worry and relief. "You're awake," she said, tears streaming down her face. "We've been trying to reach you for months." Gradually, the memories came flooding back. The car accident, the coma, the months spent trapped in a nightmare of my own mind's creation. The mysterious caller had been my subconscious, trying desperately to wake me up. As I recovered in the hospital, I learned that my family and doctors had been attempting various methods to bring me out of the coma. They had played recordings of their voices, telling me about my day, hoping the information would seep into my subconscious. That explained how the caller knew so much about my daily life in the dream world. The experience left me shaken but grateful. I had been given a second chance at life, pulled back from the brink by my own mind's desperate attempts to wake up. As I readjusted to the real world, I couldn't help but wonder about the nature of reality and consciousness. And sometimes, late at night, I still find myself listening for that phantom phone ring, a reminder of the thin line between dreams and reality. I've always been a city girl at heart, thriving on the bustling energy and anonymity that comes with urban living. My cozy studio apartment on the 15th floor was my sanctuary, a place where I could unwind and feel secure after long days at the office. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the cityscape, and I often found myself gazing out at the twinkling lights, feeling on top of the world. But one evening, as I was preparing dinner, I felt an odd sensation creep up my spine. You know that feeling when you're being watched? It was like that, but more intense. I glanced out the window and froze. Across the street, in a building about 50 yards away, I saw a man staring directly at me. He was standing motionless in a darkened room, his face barely visible. I blinked, thinking it must be a trick of the light. But when I looked again, he was still there, unmoving, unwavering, just watching. I quickly drew the curtains, my heart racing. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was being paranoid. After all, in a city this big, coincidences happen all the time, right? But over the next few days, I noticed him again and again. No matter what time I looked, morning, afternoon, or the dead of night, he was there, always in the same spot, always staring. It was driving me crazy. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I felt like a prisoner in my own home. I tried to ignore him, to go about my life as if everything was normal. But his constant presence gnawed at me. I started closing my curtains more often, peering through tiny gaps to see if he was still there. He always was. I began to notice details about him. His gaunt face, his dark, hollow eyes, the way he never seemed to move or leave his post. My friends told me I was being ridiculous when I confided in them. They suggested it might be a mannequin or a cardboard cutout, but I knew better. There was something alive and sinister about his gaze. I considered calling the police, but what could I tell them? That a man in another building was looking out his window? After weeks of this psychological torture, I'd had enough. I decided to confront him. It was a rash decision, fueled by sleepless nights and frayed nerves. I marched across the street and into his building, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. The lobby was eerily quiet, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. I took the elevator to his floor, my palms sweaty as I pressed the button. The hallway stretched before me, dim and foreboding. I walked slowly, counting the doors until I reached the one I knew must be his. For a moment, I hesitated. Was I really going to do this? Confront a stranger who'd been stalking me for weeks? But I was too far gone to turn back now. I needed answers. I needed this to end. With a deep breath, I raised my hand and knocked on the door. The silence that followed my knock was deafening. I waited, my breath held, straining to hear any movement from inside. Just as I was about to knock again, I heard a soft shuffling. The door creaked open slowly, revealing a sliver of darkness beyond. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. I've seen you watching me." The door opened wider, and there he stood. Up close, he was even more unsettling. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and his eyes... God! His eyes were like black holes, devoid of any warmth or humanity. He smiled, revealing yellowed teeth. "I've been waiting for you," he said, his voice a dry whisper that sent chills down my spine. "Please, come in." Every instinct screamed at me to run, but a morbid curiosity pushed me forward. I stepped into the apartment, and immediately I knew I'd made a terrible mistake. The room was bare except for a chair facing the window, his observation post. But what made my blood run cold were the walls. They were covered, floor to ceiling, with photos. Photos of me, hundreds, maybe thousands of them. Me at work, me shopping, me with friends. Intimate moments I thought were private. And in the center of it all, a large portrait of me sleeping in my bed. "Do you like my collection?" he asked, his tone disturbingly casual. "I've been adding to it for years, long before you moved into that apartment. You see, I've always known you were meant for me." I backed away, my hand fumbling for the doorknob, but he was faster. In a flash, he was between me and the door, his skeletal frame belying an inhuman strength. I screamed, but the sound seemed to be swallowed by the oppressive atmosphere of the room. He grabbed my arm, his touch icy and unyielding. "You can't leave," he hissed. "We have so much to catch up on." I fought back, driven by pure adrenaline. My elbow connected with his face, and I heard a satisfying crunch. He stumbled back, giving me the opening I needed. I yanked the door open and ran. The hallway seemed endless as I sprinted towards the elevator, his footsteps echoing behind me. I jabbed the button frantically, but the elevator was too slow. I could hear him getting closer. With no other choice, I dove for the stairwell. I took the stairs 2 at a time, my lungs burning, my legs aching. I could hear him above me, his breathing ragged, calling out to me in that terrible whisper. 15 floors. It felt like an eternity. Finally, I burst out of the building, gasping for air. The street was deserted, the city unaware of the nightmare unfolding in its midst. I ran without direction, just needing to put distance between myself and that monster. After what felt like hours, I finally stopped, collapsing on a bench in a park I didn't recognize. As I sat there trying to catch my breath and make sense of what had happened, a horrible realization dawned on me. I couldn't go home. He knew where I lived. He had been watching me for years. Nowhere was safe. The days that followed were a blur of police reports, restraining orders, and sleepless nights in cheap motels. I changed my phone number, deleted my social media accounts, even dyed my hair. But nothing could shake the feeling that he was still out there, watching, waiting. I moved to a new city, started a new job, tried to build a new life. But the trauma lingered. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, checking windows for that familiar silhouette. Every stranger's glance felt like a threat. The world had become a dangerous, unpredictable place. Months passed, and slowly I began to feel safe again. I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, I had escaped him for good. But then, one night, as I was getting ready for bed in my new apartment, I felt it. That same sensation that had started it all. The feeling of being watched. With trembling hands, I approached the window and peered out into the darkness. And there, in a building across the street, I saw him. That gaunt face, those hollow eyes, staring directly at me. My blood ran cold as I realized the horrible truth. He had found me. As I stand here now, my hand reaching for my phone to call the police, I know one thing for certain. This nightmare is far from over. He will always be there. The man in the window, watching, waiting. And I will always be looking over my shoulder, wondering when he'll make his next move. In this twisted game of cat and mouse, there is no escape, only survival.